I'm excited for today, and my guest here with me, Dr. Richard Bucharelli. How are you today, sir?
I'm very well. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, the Jakub Show welcomes you, and I'm excited because I keep seeing your videos and clips on TikTok over online. It could be my feed, and but either way, I'm excited because it was like listening to myself and of what I've been dealing with over the past 15, 20 years of sport frustration here in
Right.
Ontario. But we will get to that because that's just a
Sure.
tease for later on in the show today. I know you and I are going to have an excellent conversation on this. But first, I'd like to get some more background of about yourself to the audience. Um, just quick little introduction on your background in sport and what you do.
Sure. Yeah, I'll be brief. I was a soccer player. I became a coach right after university. I played in university and semi-professionally, and wasn't good enough to make any money as a player, so I became a coach pretty young. And because I had studied sports science, I ended up sort of specializing in kind of the fitness and the sports science side of coaching. I did end up starting a business called Soccer Fitness. I didn't want anyone to be confused about what I was doing, and I started just traveling from one field to the next, training individual players, teams, etc. And because I was still working and coaching, and I had a fairly large network, and I was able to build up a decent little business for myself, even kind of right out of university. And eventually, some of the connections and whatever that I had also paid off for me. I started to get some work at the higher levels in the sport as well. I started actually with my own university, York University. I was an assistant coach there. Eventually, then ended up getting hooked up, working as a fitness coach and sports scientist in the Ontario provincial program. Then the women's national teams. I had a kind of a pair, two sort of parallel things going on. I had my business,
Hmm.
which paid the bills
Yep.
and did all that, and then all the work in higher soccer, which didn't pay the bills at all, but I pursued both at the same time. So I did, I worked with the women's national teams for a little while in Canada. I worked with Toronto FC Academy. From there, I actually ended up getting then a job as a fitness coach and sports scientist in Uruguay. So I went and spent a year in South America with a second division club there. I worked then in Ottawa with the Ottawa Fury, and
Nice.
all while that was happening, I also got talked into going back to school. First, I did I mean, it's kind of a funny story that there was a player in the TFC Academy. His father is a professor, a biomechanics professor at Guelph. We met. I sort of helped his son a little with some of the work I was doing, so we kind of became friends. And he talked me into going back to school. I did a master's degree under him, eventually also a PhD. My business survived the COVID thing, and because of those lockdowns and slowdowns and all that, I ended up basically becoming a full-time professor in kinesiology and fitness and health and sports science. So in any case, that's all led me to now. I am a professor. I have my business, which is now picking up and growing again. We did rebrand our business to speed training. We work,
Mhm.
of course, with soccer, but we work with lots of other athletes, and we even work with people who are not athletes but kind of want to train like athletes. I've got some ongoing research projects that I'm doing, and I am also a coach educator. It's a big passion of mine, teaching coaches specifically here in Canada, because we don't teach coaches about fitness and sports science, and then we expect them to provide, let's say, adequate physical training to athletes, and they're not really prepared. So anyway, that's in a nutshell. I said I would be brief, but maybe I wasn't brief enough. But that's it.
That's excellent. That's a wealth of knowledge. And I'm going to pick at that wealth of knowledge because I'm going to need your help to help me with understanding certain things and maybe convey the
Sure.
message better to the public because I haven't conveyed the message very well over the past 7 years of broadcasting my voice to the world. My audience that's listening doesn't even know any of this about me. And I wanted to share it on the show while you're here so you and I know where we both stand. You have a tremendous wealth of knowledge. Mine is about 20 some years of coaching experience. I started very early. Uh, 2002, I got my C license in Ontario. And from there, every single level up to USL, I coached men's United Soccer Leagues in
Mhm.
Michigan for a couple of years and then retired got introduced back into soccer about 5 years after I retired from soccer, and my kid decided she wanted to play, and she was very good, and she still plays now. But the experience was an up and down experience where I got the firsthand view from the sideline of what I used to do and what was being done to my child. So let's focus on coaching part first
Right.
here in Ontario, because I've coached for so long. I've done the OPDL route with my kid. She's back in L5 now because um, OPDL isn't what it's supposed to be. So she's
Right.
back. She's a U16 OPDL, L5 here in Windsor, Essex County, and a lot of issues. And I heard you before, and I really want to get more of these ideas. But let's focus on coaches first, because there is individual focused training, there's team training, and there's training outside of practice. And
Right.
these seems to be concepts lost on our coaches in leagues right now. Does that sound familiar? Because I've been missing that since my kid started 10 years ago in the sport.
So it's a good point. And I guess I would have to start by saying that the problem that we've got in Canada is because for so long we have had incompetent coach educators and instructors. And I have to say, I say that even respectfully. I don't mean that they are, unintelligent. I mean, they're not competent, meaning
Mhm.
they haven't, coached at a high level. They haven't been exposed to high level coaching. They haven't been exposed to high level coaching education. And they have no experience and track record. And somehow in Ontario, in many other provinces, and in Canada, the people we hire to teach coaches and to build the coaching curriculum are just not competent enough to do it. And so what happens is, because they're incompetent, they incorrectly assess the situation. They incorrectly diagnose like what they think the problems are with players and all that. And then the solutions that they propose, because the assessment and the diagnosis is incorrect, the solutions they propose are also incorrect. So going back to the thing about training, since you've been coaching for a while and you did your licenses, you probably would remember, or this will ring a bell maybe for you, is that sometime around maybe 10 or 15 years ago, we got this idea that, as an example, well, nobody around the world does unopposed training. Every single thing in your training session has to have opponents, has to have decision making. That's that big buzzword now.
Right.
I'll tell you just an anecdote here, but
Mhm.
I worked as a coach educator in Ontario soccer for almost 10 years.
Mhm.
And the first time that I was one of the instructors on the C license, I heard the lead instructor say, okay, if you go anywhere else in the world, if you go to Argentina, if you go to Brazil, whatever, he says, they don't do any unopposed training. That's what he said. Okay.
Wow.
Now, mind you, I was there with him in 2017,
Mhm.
the year after I lived in Uruguay in South America and worked with a professional club there.
Mhm.
And I was able to travel. I went to Argentina many times. I sat in on the Argentinian A license that our head coach was taking, and I saw directly every single professional club in Uruguay and Argentina does unopposed training. And I don't just mean with the first team, I mean with the academy. So it's like, this is just one example, but there's dozens of examples. The people who teach coaches in Ontario and Canada are not competent. Okay. And because they're not competent, the information that they are passing on, oftentimes it's incorrect. Oftentimes it's misguided
Mhm.
unintentionally. And I would argue that, because I've seen this too, that incompetent leaders don't want competent people underneath them, and they don't want any kind of good ideas coming up
Yep.
that are contrary to what they've done or what they've said. So they push everything down, and
Mhm.
so what ends up happening is coaches that come through the licensing are just not prepared, and they've got all these ideas that are incorrect. And I'm not saying that you don't need decision making and you don't need opposition and what all of that in your training. In fact, in my own course, which is a course specific to fitness, but I teach coaches in my course how to integrate fitness into their own training.
Mhm.
I explain things with a continuum where you have predictability on one end of the continuum, specificity on the other. Okay. The most specific way to train for our sport is to play the sport with as little rules and conditions as possible. You can train fitness that way. Of course, you have opposition, decision making, you have all those things. It's very
Mhm.
predictable. Or sorry, it's very specific. What do you sacrifice when you maximize specificity? You sacrifice predictability. You don't know. Some players may do less physical work than others. The playmaker is going to hang back and make passes. The players that are fit, that are going to go on the wing and run.
Mhm.
Some are going to defend more than others, whatever. If you
Mhm.
want to make it more predictable, you go a little farther along the continuum. Eventually, you get to unopposed passing drills. You get to, technical exercises. Like you said, you get to keep ups. You get to
Right.
even more predictable. You get to running on a treadmill,
Mhm.
lifting weights. They're
Mhm.
not bad. One side is specific, the other side is predictable. Top level athletes, and especially kids as they're coming up, they need both.
Yes.
They need as much of they can as all of it. So that's the problem.
100% agree. Now, it's not being conveyed at the levels that I've experienced outside of my own coaching, which I stress not only everything you just mentioned, but also how diet and
Okay.
diet's huge for any athletes I ever coach or train because it's a part of it. Your intake has to be sufficient enough and has to be resourceful enough. So that's the only thing that I always add. But you're 100% correct, and we lack that. Maybe we don't lack it because we know and don't do it. It's I think the coaches aren't prepared and the problem I see where I am, and in Southwestern Ontario especially, it's parent coaches. So the lack of coaches that want to coach because they coach because they have to.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
a secondary problem. I didn't start that way. I started young. I didn't have kids. I didn't have kids until my second time around coaching. So
Yeah.
I coach for the passion, for the game, for the exercise, for the sport, for the mentality of the whole thing. I think now we'll get to the money thing, but now you get the parents coaching and the messages just isn't conveyed from the club to expectations to the coach from Ontario, from Canada soccer isn't trickling down, if any, to what it should be.
Well, yeah, it's a valid point. I mean, I think I will say that there is some benefit, and maybe benefit isn't even the right word. It's almost there's a need, there's a demand, for parent coaches
Mhm.
because there aren't enough coaches and there's so many
Right.
players and all that. So often, I don't even know if this happened with you because you were a professional coach before, but a lot of times a mother or father will kind of get, will be asked to coach a team because there is no one else to do it, and so you're sort of
True.
filling that gap. And I mean, certainly, just because you have a child on the team doesn't mean you're not going to be a good coach or whatever. But I think you've touched on the problem, which is that often, because let's say a parent or whatever is kind of forced into it, doing it out of necessity, maybe they don't put the time and energy that would be required into it. Sometimes or often maybe they're volunteering, and if they're
Right.
volunteering, fine. I mean, that's a commendable thing for sure. And by the way, when I started coaching, I'm telling you my story, I wasn't paid for anything,
Yeah.
until
Same.
4 or 5 years, I would say, until I could even have the courage to ask
Mhm.
for pay. But so everyone was volunteering 20 years ago. But in any
Yep.
case, they're doing an important job, but there's some limitations there. Of course, if a coach is paid, now it's a job. Now the employer, the club, whoever it is, can be a little more demanding. You can have standards and expectations for them. I think the other side of it's good that coaching is professionalized. I think that's really important, and obviously, I want coaches to be paid for their work. But I think that this word standards, you mentioned the OPDL, and this word standards is thrown around a lot.
Mhm.
But often when you look at what the actual standards are in writing, they're
Mhm.
often they're often very low. Usually, whether it's Ontario Soccer or the other provincial associations, the Player Development League, they make the standard that you have to have the Canadian licensing. Now they're calling it a CONCACAF license, but whatever. It's a
Yep.
license delivered by Canadian instructors. And remember, the Canadian instructors are incompetent. Okay. I've made this point many times, but I have to say it again because people need to understand. When you get a UEFA license in any country in Europe, when you get a CONMEBOL, okay,
Hmm.
South American license,
Hmm.
the instructors are usually the best coaches in the country. They would never get hired. I saw it in Uruguay, I saw it in Argentina, and I've been all over the world. I've presented research in 10 different countries, and the UEFA instructors, the South American coaching instructors, they are coaches that have coached professionally. They're coaches that have been coaches in the national teams. Usually, they have a few decades of experience before they ever get hired to teach. The
Hmm.
sports scientists, they're all people like me. They have PhDs, they have research experience. They have so that's who teaches the courses, and that means that the licenses have value and credibility. It doesn't mean you're a perfect coach because you have a UEFA license, but that's a standard which is
Hmm.
consistent, accepted, acknowledged, and recognized. And by the way, recognized all over the world
All over the
if
world.
you have a UEFA
Exactly.
license, right? So
Yep.
now the Canadian license, my contention is that Canadian licenses can never be accepted and recognized as having any credibility or any standard because the instructors, the people who deliver them, there is nobody on that staff of instructors that has any high level coaching experience. Some of them have barely ever coached at all.
Mm.
And on top of that, they're they don't have the knowledge or the background or the track record themselves.
Hmm.
So they have no business even having been hired to teach. Now, incompetent teachers means that the whatever license, whatever so-called standard that you have that was delivered to you by those incompetent teachers is has no value.
Hmm.
So if that's the standard on paper, that's already a big problem because there's no credibility. And on top of that, the other issue with the so-called standards in these, leagues and all that is that often they're not enforced at all.
Mm.
Often clubs will hire whoever they can hire, regardless of whether they meet the standard or not. Have spoken out quite a bit about the fitness standards in the player
Hmm.
development league, which are, again, I can't say anything. They're an absolute farce. You have clubs sending in fake, like literally fabricated fitness assessment data. The fitness assessments that are being done are not standardized. They're not reliable or valid. There's no expertise in the provincial or national associations. There's no sports scientists that are looking at that data or doing anything with it. When they say fitness or sports science and they ask parents to pay, $1,000 or $2,000 more per year because they say, well, in the OPDL, you get fitness and in the lower leagues, you don't. And that's the reason for the extra cost. It's a complete lie.
Hmm.
So there's no other way to say it. So the standards are low, and often even those low standards aren't even enforced.
Hmm.
So my contention would be, yes, let's professionalize coaching. Yes, let's, parent volunteers are limited. We got to get people young, energetic, ambitious that are willing to make their coaching their career. But if we're going to hold them to a standard, we got to make sure the standards are credible, or else it's just as it's just a buzzword, which is what I believe is happening now. So.
That is true, and it's an obstacle. And I hear this other word thrown around a lot called pathway. The pathway has been thrown at me, and my
Yeah.
kid since she was a U9, U10, and it was thrown at us. Oh, the
Hmm.
pathway, the pathway, the pathway. And I know coaching is an obstacle, and the pathway itself is an obstacle here in Ontario to getting anywhere. And I
Yeah.
remember taking players early in my coaching career up to Toronto for TFC tryouts, and that was a something not
Yeah.
fantastic. But learning
Yeah.
from that experience 10, 15 years later with this, what's happening now, the pathway isn't actually a concrete pathway. It's just a word because it's hard to pinpoint where that path starts and exactly where that path ends. As a pathway from
Yeah.
as a soccer, if you want to be a soccer player, where do you go? What do you
Yeah.
do?
Well, here's the interesting point. I agree. I mean, that word is another buzzword. It goes right in the same category as, standards. Okay. I would say maybe the biggest problem is because, the experience you've had, you coached, you're a professional coach, you brought players to trials, and the experience was not positive. And we've had like decades. And I mean, even I remember hearing about things when I was a little kid just starting in the game, and colleagues of mine that have been coaching even since before I was born. Okay. Everybody that's been involved in it has consistently had these negative experience where they see incompetent leadership, incompetent coaches, no scouting, no standardized system of player tracking or player
Mhm.
identification, all kinds of like unfair, illogical decisions being made, talented players that somehow go under the radar, and then they get brought back after they've declared citizenship in another country. I mean, on and on and on and on, right? It's like we have such a history of incompetence, okay, that no one trusts anything that the governing bodies have to say. Parents that don't know, that are kind of ignorant to the whole thing, they'll trust it.
Yep.
But the coaches, the people that have been involved in it, they all know. And so, since there's that lack of trust, the coaches, the people don't really buy into it. They tolerate it. They accept it because they have to, because they need a job or whatever. But it's not like we don't have everyone working together to try to push people into that pathway because nobody believes that it's credible. Here's a perfect example. Okay. If we really believed that all of the best players were being fairly and objectively identified and asked to go to this OPDL or the other provincial player development leagues, if we believe that, and on top of that, that we knew that the provincial associations were not taking a piece of the revenue from the league, which is a financial conflict of interest.
Hmm.
So if that's corruption. If there was no corruption and everyone really truly genuinely believed that it was being done fairly and equitably, then why wouldn't clubs that are outside of the OPDL, or even the clubs themselves that have their whatever, their I model team, their B team, their
Right.
why wouldn't they all say, hey, it's an honor for us to push players up to that league.
Hmm.
It's an honor for us to get players signed into the TFC Academy.
Yep.
They would feel that way, the same way that in Italy, in France, in Uruguay, whatever, a lower level club gets a feeling of pride when they push players up. They also get financial compensation. That's another issue which we don't have, so there's
Yes.
no incentive to do it. Okay, but even before that financial incentive, there would be a point of pride which doesn't exist. And again, I mean, it's been a while since I worked in the TFC Academy, but I remember very clearly, okay, not only was there not a real strong connection between the clubs and the TFC Academy, like the players actively wanting to go, the coaches wanting to push them up. Not only was there no connection, okay, most club coaches, including most of the coaches that had the best players,
Hmm.
they were discouraging their players from going to Toronto FC. They
Yep.
didn't want them to go. Why? Because they knew you're going to get probably a lower quality coach, which I have to say it is absolutely true. TFC Academy is another example of an organization. They didn't go find expert coaches. At the time that I was there, I was the only person on staff that had any experience outside of the club system and university. I came straight from the women's under 17 World Cup into that academy.
Hmm.
And, as I said, outside of me, and I was a minimum wage fitness coach there. Okay. All the full-time people there were club coaches, and they were
Hmm.
hired when they were like 27, 28 years old, most of them. Okay. So again, if you're a coach in a club in Brampton, in wherever, Woodbridge, it doesn't matter, wherever there's some talented players.
Right.
Okay. They didn't want their players to play there. So so no one buys into this system. No one believes in it. And it is absolutely 100% the fault of Canada Soccer, the provincial associations, and TFC and the other clubs that have academies, because they have done such a poor job for decades.
Hmm.
Nobody trusts them. I don't trust them either. And I'm not surprised. The pathway, it's meaningless.
Yep.
That
It
word,
wasn't
meaningless.
structured, and the structure isn't there to be utilized. So that's a problem. Now you hinted on something, corruption. I don't know. That's a word you used a lot, but from my end as a parent, and like I have to dish out a couple years of OPDL money.
Yeah,
Um, if for someone whose child also played, and I have the privilege of being close to the border, we played in
mhm,
the States
right.
when we had the opportunity for a couple
Mhm,
clubs there. Seeing the differences from when I coached and when my daughter played in the States, OPDL for the money you pay and the two divisions L3 and L1 that there are, which are tiered money,
yeah,
uh, is it's a lot, but you don't get a lot. And as a player and a parent of a player, yes, it's nice to see a player go and develop, but where and how are they developing? Traveling to Toronto every weekend to play a team, random team that's in the
mhm,
same division
yeah,
isn't development when you're not practicing 3 times a week, when you're not, where the players isn't focused on, like you mentioned earlier, on the entire series of development skills. So none of the clubs I've worked with, and there's had my child in, probably most of them here down in the Windsor area, I've been involved with. None of them do this. They take the
right,
money, they pay their coaches,
right,
and I think the latest fees for OPDL are, I think L1 was like $6,000.
right.
Like three and a half, four for L3.
Mhm,
That's
yeah,
what we paid. That's a
yeah.
lot. But what's the progress? What does the athlete get? That was my issue. And having experienced and I hate to do this to anybody
Mm,
listening to both Canadian soccer and Ontario soccer,
yeah,
Michigan side, the state side, organized,
yeah,
different style, and a lot, not all, but more of those tendencies to prepare the player in more aspects than what we have. Probably because more established, more cash flow tiers. I get it. But
yeah.
if it's there, why not utilize Ontario model yourself after that, not just something sporadic that we have right now.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. Here's what I would say, and I mean, I certainly understand. I mean, I want to speak a little later about the geographical or the
Yep.
logistical challenge with whether
Mhm.
people are from Windsor or even, I mean, I'm in Vaughan. It's a bit of a hotbed, but there's Waterloo, Kitchener. There's so
Oh
many
yeah.
areas where there's like talented players, but they're kind of, they have to travel a lot to, and then that to say nothing of Ottawa as an example or
Mhm.
whatever, even other cities that
Yep.
have a similar challenge. But putting that aside, okay. I, ultimately, I think that people respond to incentives, and so the problem with, first of all, the problem with community clubs in general, in terms of what I mean is the problem that they have with putting a really professional, organized, standardized program together, which is kind of what you're looking for. That's what you mentioned there, and
Yep.
that's what people want. They want value for their money. The
Right.
problem with that community clubs have with doing that is community clubs don't have the same incentives that, like, let's say, on the other hand, a private academy would have, because community clubs, they're nonprofits. They can get grants from the government, so they've got some
Mhm.
money coming in no matter what. Their scope is very broad. They're supposed to serve the whole community, including all the people that are not so serious about
Mhm.
it and whatever. They have a large house league. Okay, there's lots of revenue coming in,
Mhm.
which isn't really incentives driven. As long as they put a coach with, a pair of shorts and a whistle on the field, and
True.
as long as the field is, you can run on it, and they've done
Mhm.
their job, and so that, there's a lot of bureaucracy, there's a lot of
Lots.
administration. Okay, and the quality, it's more likely that the quality gets watered down. They can't do quality control. I mean, there's
Mhm.
big clubs where I live. There's like, I don't know, 40 teams.
Yep.
Okay, 20 boys, 20 girls teams, then the house league, then the
One club
development
head coach.
academy. Yeah, one guy, one person in charge of everything, and
Yeah.
and so okay, so it's quality control is very difficult,
Yep.
as opposed to, and just, I'm an advocate of this because there have been people, like, I just don't think that they understand why I'm criticizing OPDL, for
Mhm.
example, because they think I'm criticizing it because it's expensive. I'm not. I don't like the gatekeeping in OPDL, and I believe that when you know run your so-called high performance pathway through these non-profit community clubs
Hmm.
that have that existing bureaucracy, and on top of that, there's the horrible bureaucracy in the national and provincial associations. You can't possibly out of that system expect to get high performance and value for your money. There's lots of people that are getting paid that are incompetent. There's lots of people that are getting paid for doing nothing and that have no accountability if and when they don't perform in their job. They don't even know what their job
Right.
roles and responsibilities are. In a private academy, it's like my business. My business is a small business. The only possible way that I can get revenue from anyone is if people are happy.
Mm-hmm.
If there's an issue, if a parent is not happy with something, if a player is not developing, if there's an issue with staff, whatever, I have to deal with it right away. I'm incentivized to deal with it right away because
Hmm.
if not, my business cannot survive. So we are in the situation that we're in here. We don't have, dozens of professional clubs across the province like a landmass the size of Ontario would have in Europe or wherever, and
Yep.
in fact, the landmass is even bigger. But
Hmm.
even our population, like Toronto GTA has like 7 million people.
Hmm.
There should be 3 or 4 at least professional clubs.
Right.
And then there should be clubs outside of there. They should all have academies. The academies would all be free,
Hmm.
and people would push their players into those academies. We don't have that. I don't know if we're ever going to have that. So pay to play, it is going to be there.
Yeah.
And you or I could not run a soccer program without having to pay for field rentals and coaches and this. And so, the expense is going to be there. But the problem isn't the expense. The problem is, first of all, people don't feel like they're getting value, and they're not getting value because of the administration and bureaucracy. You
Hmm.
want value, you get rid of bureaucracy.
Yep.
That's one. Two, okay, which is the bigger problem that I have with the OPDL and with this model in general, is it is corrupt. It's gatekeeping. Okay. Provincial associations tell talented players and their families, if you want to play for the provincial team, if you want to be in there's that word again, pathway,
Hmm.
if you want to be in that pathway, not you should, not this is an option for you. No, no, you must, you have to go into the player development league. Oh, and by the way, it's the most expensive league. It's the
Hmm.
league where, we don't really provide value because, we don't have to. We're
Yep.
forcing people to go into it. Oh, and also, by the way, as if that wasn't bad enough, we get about $500 for every single player's registration from that league. That's the problem I have with it. Okay.
Hmm.
Bureaucracy leads to corruption. Gatekeeping and corruption means that you can't possibly have high standards and high quality. Okay. And, this is not the best, most efficient way for us to identify talented players and get them to progress and develop to their full capacity. We're not doing that.
Hmm.
So that's what I would say.
I love it. That is a good summary. And for today, before this is going to be part one. We're going to come
Sure.
back in a few months and do a part two
Yeah, let's do it.
on a more of a positive spin, and we'll do a comeback on player development and individualism and things like that. We'll do that.
Mhm.
But that's exactly what the audience needs to hear because a lot of people don't. They don't have access to information. And that's what this whole thing today is going to be about, giving this to the parents that are listening of soccer players, of talented players, people who are in OPDL and don't know, people who are trying to get in, are learning about the concept. This is the entire idea about today's episode. And I'm excited that you are here today to share this message. Can you throw out the website for me one more time and kind of an outline where it is and what you do there really quickly?
Sure. Yeah, my it's easy to remember. My website is speedtraining.ca. You can find us on Instagram at the same handle at speedtraining.ca. And if you can remember the spelling of my name, my own Instagram, where a lot of kind of the content, the videos and everything I'm putting up, it's at Richard Bucharelli. You can find out about me. And then in the speed training sites, you can find out about everything that we do in our business.
Fantastic. And I'm keeping an eye on it because I love the videos. And again, we will come back and do this again. Richard, thank you so much.
You're very
We'll definitely
welcome,
be in
Jacob.
touch.
Thank you very much for having me.